Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. This week, we have the co-founder of the LEAP apprenticeship program, an engineering trailblazer, spent decades at Microsoft. He's a D&I innovator. He has his hands in a lot of projects that I'm looking forward to delving into. We have William A. Adams. Welcome to the show, William.
Thank you, LeTroy. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said in the intro, you're one of the first Black entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. Like, just give us...
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Oh, yeah. So, just give us a little, like a biographical snapshot. Just tell us about who you are and why you're so amazing.
Okay, let's start back with my childhood. So I'm 59. So I was born in 1964. So that predates all the PCs and all that sort of stuff. And so I've lived through the birth of all the PC stuff, mobile phones, web, cloud, blah blah blah. And when I was about 12, I had an uncle who gave me a Commodore PET, which was one of the first personal computers. It was before Apple had the Apple One or two. And I just kind of self-taught, it's like, okay, thanks. And I'll take it from here. So, you didn't go to school for that. So it's certainly not as a 12-year-old, So it was all just read the magazine, program in assembly language, make some little game things, whatever. So I just kind of taught myself. Eventually, I'll just roll forward from there. Mm-hmm. I went to UC Berkeley. I started a company with my brother in Silicon Valley. We started in 1984. Okay. And at that time, it was the birth of a lot of what we now take for granted, like Apple Computer, of course, Adobe, Sun Microsystems, who came and went during that whole time period. So a lot of stuff was happening in Silicon Valley. So we just thought, we're going to get in on it, because everyone was doing that. Right. Startups were the thing. Not like today, though. Today is kind of different. Today, the startups are like, I'm going to get the big payout. And then that's it. We were like, we're going to change the world. So it was me and my brother. At that time in the 80s, mid 80s, early 90s, we probably knew all the Black entrepreneurs in tech and could count them on one or two hands. And we were two of them. So, it was as far as that's concerned, it was pretty much a wasteland. There are a lot of people Black in tech, and a lot of people worked at like IBM or some of the bigger companies and whatnot. There were very few that were like out there starting their own companies like we were. So we got started in software. We did sales calls with Steve Jobs on Next Computers. And we got a couple of their biggest clients at that time. So we were big fish in a small pond, mm-hmm. And then ultimately let's see. So we did that. I did that for about 12 years. Then I left my own company to seek my fortunes. Right. And ultimately I landed at Microsoft in 1998. And that was around the time that the DOJ, Department of Justice, was threatening to break up Microsoft as a monopoly. And I thought, what a great time to join. Mm-hmm. So I joined, survived the dot-com bust at that time because I was at Microsoft already. And then just had a 24-year career doing all sorts of stuff at Microsoft, software related for the most part. So that's where I came from.
Right.
Up till 1998.
Uh-huh. All right. So as you were, I guess, moving up the corporate ladder, so to speak, with Microsoft, like, what did you encounter, like, when it came to, a lot of times being the only person, with the seat at the table? Like, did you have to deal with bias, or like, did you have imposter syndrome? Like, just tell us about how you overcame a lot of the obstacles that, we often deal with.
Yeah, so there's I would say Microsoft was just a continuation of my path in society in general. Um, Being the only black something at some place was a constant, right? It's like I was the only black kid in my classes in school all the way up through high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was the only, black kid on my baseball team. I was the only, being the only is nothing new. So it's not like it was a surprise. You always cope with that. Back home, we lived in a Mexican neighborhood for the most part. So they're also onlys,
Uh-huh.
So you don't, as you're growing up, you don't see the systemic biases and all that other sort of stuff. It's just what's presented to you is presented to you. Now, what you do grow up with is your parents telling you you got to work twice as hard to get half as much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a common. I think people still hear that today, actually.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
you wonder why. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. Be smart, my son, because you're not going to be rewarded. Okay. So we worked hard regardless, and I can't say that I was aware of all the biases and all this sort of stuff. Things probably happened to me that in hindsight I can look back and say, those racist mofos, that I can't believe they did that to me. And there's a couple of instances where I can point to exactly, like my brother and I trying to get an account at a bank,
Mm-hmm.
and they would not give us an account. It's like, why not? We're not asking for a loan. We just want to put our money here. They gave us all sorts of excuses for why they wouldn't, and there's instances where my brother was explicitly told by people on, Sand Hill Road, there's the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, we will not lend money to people like you.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as explicit as it gets. Right.
Right.
But we just kind of grew up with, we're going to work hard. We're going to invent. I have a couple of patents from early days. There's one patent I had on all these instant messenger thingies that you use today.
Right.
I've got a patent related to that from way back then, or the fact that you can collaborate on documents, multiple people at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 1993. We had a patent filed for that. It's actually there, and it's referred to by all the subsequent patents, that actually implement this stuff. So it's like we were good,
Uh-huh.
and things didn't fall our way, and we'd probably always be like, oh man, we just got to work harder. We didn't realize it was because, well, you're not in the club and you're not getting in the club, So you keep motoring on. At
Yeah.
Microsoft, I would say that, again, only. I worked at Microsoft for 24 years. It wasn't until the last few years that I was there, last 4 or 5 years, that I ever worked with anyone who was black.
Mm-hmm.
I had a team of engineers myself. Not a single one of them was black, a large team. There were no other black people in meetings that I went to. I was always the only one. It didn't strike me as anything. It's like, here it is again,
Uh-huh.
right? And yeah, there's systemic bias and all this other sort of stuff. But you just deal with it. It's like, I'm going to be my best, and I'm going to work hard and I'm going to deliver. I know my value. So even when, the next promotion comes, like, how come I'm not getting promoted and yet I keep training people that become my manager?
Don't you hate that?
that doesn't seem right, so that kind of stuff happens. You kind of suck it up. Ultimately, I got to a point where it's like, okay, well, this is the game. Let me make sure I appreciate myself, because what you see is a lot of external validators don't come. You didn't get the extra bonus. You didn't get the promotion. You didn't get that position,
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be satisfied with your own performance and what you're getting out of it. And you have to seek your own, I was going to say pleasures, but that's not the right word. You have to seek your own rewards.
Right.
Right? It's like, okay, you're not going to give me that position. I'm going to go create a position, or I'm going to go do work that I feel is right. And unless you fire me, I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's why the LEAP program was created, because I just had a force of will. I said, we need to hire more blacks and women, or women and underrepresented minorities. I'm going to create a program to do that, and you're going to support it, right? And they went, oh, okay, Mr. Adams. So it's like that. I know I said a lot, but it's basically, okay, the world is biased. I mean, forget about the fact that you're the only whatever. You're always going to be the only whatever in some situation. How are you going to deal with it? Right? And you can't woes me it, and you can't say you owe me. It's like, no one cares about you. It's a competitive world, right? So you have to really force and make your own way, find your allies, stand up for yourself, have a mission, be clear, go, right? So that's pretty much how I've dealt with it.
Okay. So, like, what was your strategy as far as getting that buy-in from Microsoft to start the LEAP apprenticeship program?
Let's see. It started in 2015. So I was already there for 17 years. So I had credibility. I mean, just keep in mind, 17 years is a long time in and of itself to survive in any corporate environment. So I had friends and allies who I had worked with who knew I was good at what I did, and these guys were in strong enough leadership positions. They're all now leading the company, right? My peers from when I started are the people who are running the company now, literally. And so I went to those people and said, hey, I want to do this thing. I need your support. And since I had previous history with them, they are willing to go out on a limb and go, okay, yeah, sure. What do you want to do? I want to do this thing. It's going to require some money, and it's going to require you to hire some people. And they're like, okay. So the strategy there is, first of all, be good at something. You can't do this kind of stuff by just whining and complaining. You can't show up and claim social justice. You got to do this because it's the right thing. It's like, no one's going to listen to that. You have to be good. You have to be credible. You have to have allies who are going to support you. And dare I say it, it has to be the right or white allies. You can't just get all your black friends and say, hey, y'all, let's go do this. Like, you're all the blind. You need the guy who's in charge, and it's usually a white male, to back you, right? You have to be able to reach out to the people who actually are in control. If it's a black person who's sympathetic to your cause, great. But oftentimes it's not, right? It's got to be somebody who's truly pulling the levers of power. And you have to get them on your side, and then you have support and you can go do it. If you don't have that, you're just, bashing your head against the wall, and you'll only make a certain amount of success, and you'll just kind of burn out and go, it's not worth it. Right. Yeah. So allies, and I'm not trying to say, the whole allyship thing and go to training and all that. It's like, no, you need to find a sponsor, right? You need sponsorship, and those sponsors have to have control of money, right? And be able to allocate resources so that you can actually do what you're going to do.
Yeah, and that's sort of the stage we're at with Postman, is we're trying to find an executive sponsor that can sort of make leverage plays here and there and speak on our behalf to where we're not just like spinning wheels, which we have been doing for several years now. So I totally
it's
agree.
A challenge because, we had this situation, for example, where there were some guys who were from Africa, and they had been trying to get Microsoft to go into Africa with a development center for a decade, literally 10 years. A bunch of young, strong African engineers who were at Microsoft. They're in various positions. And one of them came to me while I was in the office of the CTO and said, can you help us? And I said, okay, well, what have you been doing? And they had been doing executive meetings and, all the way up to the CEO. And what invariably happened was those people would always say, yeah, that's great. And then hand them off to their underlings, right? And then the underlings would hand them off to their underlings. And then they would just keep rolling down the hill, right? I said, you're never going to make progress that way. You have to just go hire people, right? So I personally had enough resources that I went and hired people in Africa, in Kenya. I hired the first engineers and said, we're now having engineering in Kenya, right? And we laid out like, well, here's the salaries, where you get the people, here's how you do it. And then after we kind of got over that hump, then the rest of engineering came along, and suddenly it was fashionable to be in Africa, and it grew to 650 engineers within 4 years. They've since scaled back during COVID, but it's now there, right? So you have to really you have to be very laser focused on finding that one person. It doesn't take a lot. That one person in an organization who can say, I'm going to hire, or I'm going to allocate money, or I'm going to whatever. You oftentimes never get there if you keep having high level meetings, right? Where they keep passing you off to somebody. It's like, don't waste your time too much on that. Be very deliberate about asking, who is the person who runs pilot programs, right? That's the person you want to get to, and don't waste your time with all the other meetings, because it's like, you're just going to spin your wheels. Right.
So I'm curious, you've been talking about, especially with the LEAP apprenticeship program, bringing in that infusion of new talent, finding talent, like you said, in Africa and Virgin Islands. What's the strategy for implementing programs in these untapped areas, and I guess being patient enough to find those diamonds in the rough?
In my particular case, now I came with some history on this, because during my time at Microsoft, I spent a few years, 3 or 4 years, in a group called Engineering Excellence. So I was an engineering manager for a long time, and then I said to myself, ultimately, I want to become an educator. Like when I'm long retired, I want to be an educator of some sort. So let me start learning how to do that. So I joined this group called Engineering Excellence, which was about training our engineers how to be better engineers. So I trained everyone from new hires to architects on how to do the job, right? So that gave me a background, and I did this in India. I moved to India for 2.5 years, and I trained up all our engineers in India for about 3 years. So I had this background of being able to take someone from raw talent to making them into engineers, right? I have this skill. So that allowed me to put together a program. So when I identified the hiring of women and minorities, you had to identify, well, why aren't we hiring them? Other than the mechanics of, well, because we're not going to anything other than the top 15 schools in the country, right? And it's all male, Right. It's like, okay, if you could find the people, what then would be the gap? Why wouldn't you hire them then? Why wouldn't you hire a bunch of women from Mills College, which is a women's, all women's. So, okay, maybe they don't have the CS background. Maybe they were all trained up in biophysics, or biology or whatever the heck. Okay, so there's a bit of a skills gap. You need to teach them, not teach them how to program, because they're already probably programming, but you need to teach them how to program in a team, right? You need to socialize them. So you need to help them build their network of support. Like, okay, when you're in the trenches and you don't know how to answer a question, who are you going to turn to? Who are your buddies? How do you find out how to solve a problem, right? So I put together a program that was a 16-week program that says, okay, 4 weeks, we're going to train you technically. And then 12 weeks, you're going to essentially be an intern in an actual engineering team, just like a college intern would be. So we put together a whole package, right, that says, here's the gap. Well, first of all, here's the people. Here's the gap. Here's how we're going to train them on the gap. And then you're going to kick the tires on them for 12 weeks. So you really get a sense for whether they're going to fit with you or not, right?
Right.
So I had a whole package leaning on my years of experience, and we presented it to engineering teams and said, here you go, try this out. And after a few iterations of that, the hiring rate's pretty high. Is like, at the time, it was like 75% of them got hired. Now it's probably more like 95% people get hired. So it's like, why would you not do this at that point? Right? It's guaranteed. How many women or underrepresented minorities do you want? This program's guaranteed to get them for you. Right. Once you have established that, you can now say, all right, let's go do it in South America. You know, we have a template. We know how much it costs. All you had to do is pour in the people. We have the jobs waiting for them over here. So there you go. You know, we created the formula.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338 or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
All right, so just talk about Tequity, because I kind of, even though it might not be a direct connection, I kind of sense that there is somehow a connection between that and what you're doing with Tequity.
Yeah, Tequity is the why. So you know, if LEAP is the how, Tequity is the why. And what I'm recognizing is that in the world today, wealth is in technology. Right? In the early 1900s, wealth was in industries and textiles and cotton and, you know, railroads, steel. But now it's all about technology. All the billionaires, the top billionaires, 10 out of, you know, the top 10, at least 6 are probably tech related. So, okay, fine. Now, I don't necessarily want everyone to become a top 10 billionaire or trillionaire, whatever they are these days. But I want them to be able to get a piece of that pie, because why not? Right? Why do we have to be stuck with McDonald's jobs when we could be sharing in the biggest growth engine of this century? Right? So Tequity, equity in technology, is just a recognition that women and minorities can benefit the most by having some equity share in technology. Well, how do you get that? Well, it's either getting a job at places that are on that path, like Microsoft, right? Amazon, Google, Facebook, whoever. Or it's just helping people create their own equity by creating their own inventions using technology, right? And today, as I was just talking to someone yesterday where I said, well, there's never been a time in history where technology was more accessible than it is today. So the barriers to entry are reducing fast. I mean, you can quite literally create software by talking to something like ChatGPT in a matter of a day. Forget about college and a CS degree and all the rest. You can just talk to the computer and generate something, right? You don't even have to go to boot camp, you know, software boot camps.
Right.
It's like, yeah, all that's done. You know, we have now automated the intellectual pursuit of software. And this is why you see a lot of layoffs in tech. So that's how you, I want to get people a share of that technology so that they, as technology continues to grow and generate wealth, they get some of it, right? We get some of it. Because if you don't do that and you kind of stand on the sidelines of it all, you end up with really nothing, and the gap is going to increase fast. Right. So it's like, you know, if you were a farmer in the early 1900s and suddenly the tractors came along, you know, whether they were steam generated or diesel or whatever, and you're still stuck behind your ox,
right? You
know, plowing your field. It's like, okay, now I'm just going to keep plowing my field like this. Like, you're going to be out of business within a decade if that's the way you're going to go. You need to get on this new fangled steam tractor, right? So that's what I just look at that. And it's a recognition also that it's not going to be handed to us. As much as we can complain about fairness in the world and all this other stuff, it's like, it's a competitive sport. If we don't do for ourselves, it's not going to be done for us. So let's go, right? So that's what Tequity is all about, is just addressing that, right?
Right. All right. So like moving forward with, I guess, what is kind of giving you excitement at the moment? Talk about mixed reality and the work you're doing with that.
Yeah. So mixed reality, what is it? So most people are probably familiar with the term virtual reality, and has probably seen some form of goggles at some point in life, right? Virtual reality was invented back in the 80s. Jaron Lanier, my buddy. And it's just that you can put some goggles on your face, and what you see is a 3D recreation of a world that you can interact with and all that sort of stuff. Augmented reality is that same idea, but there's a pass-through, meaning you can actually see the world around you. I can see my office while I've got these goggles on, and some 3D objects are in that world mixed, right?
Right. Or
you've got your phone, you hold it up, and you're looking at something like a building, and up pops the price of the building or a menu or something like that. Those are kind of augmented reality. Mixed reality is just combining those things and saying, yeah, there's immersive virtual reality, there's augmented, meaning 3D interactive, and anything else in between, right? Well, I think this is a new, at this point, it's a new platform, and virtual reality has been the promised land for the last 40 years, right? Since the 80s. But, so what's different today? Well, what's different today is I've got this Apple Vision Pro goggles back there. And what's different today is the shrinkage of compute power has marched on continuously in those 40 years. So the amount of power in those goggles, a computer on your face, basically, is the same as what's in my MacBook Air. It's Apple's M2 chip. So these goggles are now super powerful from a compute standpoint. The little screens that go in front of your eyes are super high resolution, right, to the point where you cannot distinguish the pixels, right? Your eyes cannot see fine enough to distinguish one pixel from another. So that means that I can generate content that you cannot distinguish from the real stuff in front of you. Okay. And it moves in real time. Like with the Apple Vision Pro, you don't need hand controllers like you do with the Oculus Quest thing. There's no hand controllers. Your hands are the controllers. And it does eye tracking, right? So I can just look, I don't even have to use my hands. All right. So all of that combined means that the platform, it's now here. Now it's $3,500 in the Apple Vision Pro, but it's going to drop, right? It'll come down. It'll be $1,200 soon enough, and we'll all have these capabilities. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic for gaming, right? It's like, So I have this. I met a guy who's a quadriplegic, and I said, "Bro, you need these goggles because your world is too hard. He doesn't have very much use of his hands. He can't walk around." He uses a stick on his hand. He has to type on a keyboard. It's really hard. Or he has an assistant who does half the things for him. So his day is very challenging, right? We slapped some goggles on him, the Apple Vision Pro. He learned how to do everything with his eyes. He doesn't use his hands at all. He can look at windows, move them around, click on things, eyes, voice. He can utter some things. He could even say click if he wanted to click on things. So this has changed his world. He can now do 4 or 5 things at once, whereas before he couldn't. He could do one thing at a time. He had to have his assistant even to do an email, right? He's editing videos, got email going on the side. He can order stuff from Amazon, whatever. All because of these goggles, right? And the way that they amplify his ability to interact with the world in ways that he couldn't otherwise. So I think the mixed reality gives capabilities to people that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And I'm completely ignoring like oh, gaming is so much better. It's like, yeah, whatever. That doesn't enable anything.
Right.
But this quadriplegic, it's like, oh my God, his world is transformed. What it also does is it opens up new avenues for application development, which means that for people who are outside of the classic like CS degree, $100,000 job at Microsoft or whatever, you could be a content creator and make a lot of money simply because you're creating content for people to consume in this new environment, right? Mm-hmm. And we know this is true because there's, not a ton of YouTube creators that make tons of money, but there's YouTube creators that make tons of money. There's Instagram people that make tons of money, and it's not because they're CS people. It's because they're creating content, right? So instead of just going to people and trying to shoehorn them into classic CS jobs, computer science jobs, there's a whole new platform here where I can say, take your creativity, leverage this new technology, and create new businesses based on this, right? Forget about trying to get a seat at that old table. Create a new table,
yeah.
Right? So that's how I view mixed reality. It's like, oh, it's a whole new platform and it's a whole new set of tools. And there's nothing, the barrier to entry is really low. Right? It's like, what do you need? You need a camera. You need some simple programming skills to put content together. It's not that hard. A lot more people can do it. Let's get on that. Right?
Right.
So that was a long-winded way of saying that's what I see in mixed reality.
Like in our industry, we often hear tech for the sake of tech.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the key to longevity in the industry, like especially for you, is doing work that designing technology that is inclusive and is for the better good of others?
Yeah, I would. How would I say that? The key to longevity is always being customer focused, right? Because that's going to change over time. Tech for tech's sake is pointless because what you'll do, tech for tech's sake, you'll just keep inventing stuff, regardless of any customer need. Hey, this is really neat. It's like, okay, does it help anyone? Or is it just another thing you're going to cram down the throat? So I think the key, if you're going to be a technologist, and I'm saying this broadly, I'm not saying you need to be a PhD student of computer science. I'm saying you're just someone who observes technology as it evolves and you know how to, where it's going and how to leverage it, is being able to see stuff and say, oh, here's a group of people that can benefit from that, right? That's the key to longevity, and it changes, and not getting tied to singular things. Like when I was first growing up, I taught myself assembly language programming, which no one does anymore. I taught myself C, Pascal, Objective-C. So languages change over time, and you have to continue to change with them. So technology, same thing. When I started out, it was the PC on your desk, blah, blah, blah. Now, just sitting in my office, there's probably 20 computers in here, and they don't all look like computers. Some of them look like watches. Some of them look like cameras. Some of them look like monitors. But there's all sorts of technology, and I have to adapt and go, oh, well, technology can be used in this or this or this or this, and not get stuck on desktop apps with Windows and mice and keyboards, right? Right. I've got a robot arm over there. I've got a CNC router in the garage, and they're all computers. So it's like that. You have to just be adaptive.
What do you find most rewarding in your journey?
Continuous learning. I find that most rewarding. What I'm doing and working on today, some things I go back and repeat. Like there's probably, I've created 3D graphics engines at least 3 times in my career. And each time I've done it, I've done it because I learned something new, or the technology changed and the tools that were available were different, right? Right now I'm working on this, I don't know if you've ever heard of SVG graphics, vector graphics. So I'm working on an SVG rendering engine. Why? There's plenty that exists and it's in everyone's browser. It's like, yeah, but not like this one. So, it's like there's always a challenge. And I like writing code. I've always written code since I was 12. I'm still writing code every day. I was writing code before we started our conversation, and I'll continue writing code after we're done.
Right.
So I like that challenge, and I like the fact that technology is always evolving. There's always something new, right? There's always something to discover. There's always a way to optimize. And probably best of all, I like the fact that we can use technology in service to man, or in service to humankind, right? I'm a geek, but I like technology, not just for technology's sake, but I like technology because it can help people. It can help my quadriplegic friend. It can help whole villages do stuff that they couldn't do before. It helps them get into another economic bracket. So I like the ability of technology to be able to do that. So that's what brings me joy, is just being able to harness that and bring it to more people, right?
Right. What's something about you that people would find most surprising?
That I used to race mountain bikes. I don't know. If anyone's met me in the last 10 or 15 years, they would have no clue that I was quite the stud athlete. But, now I'm just a 60-year-old, dad bod kind of guy. But I still like riding mountain bikes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we could have seen you, potentially in the X Games early on.
Maybe not X Games. I wasn't that extreme, but you certainly see me out on some mountain bike course somewhere. I'm going to actually go next week.
Right. All right, cool. So what do you see when you look in the mirror?
Oh, I see a guy that doesn't have enough time to do all the things he wants to do.
Like what?
That's what I see.
Like what?
Oh, like what? Man, look at all those people going to space. I want to do that. Man, I want to have my own. I want a place like Skywalker Ranch, video production facility. I want to produce, feature films. Man, I want to get into pottery making. I mean, there's just a whole laundry list of stuff and experiences that I'd like to have. There's just not enough time,
right?
But I'm gonna do what I can do. So that's the only thing.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I'm surprised you're mentioning space right now, especially with that crew that's stuck there until February.
Yeah. Well, that's because of Boeing. I mean, it's like lesson learned: don't go up on a Boeing spaceship, right? You already know their planes don't work. Why would you take a flyer on one of their rockets? I mean, that's just the way it is. But SpaceX to the rescue, right? So, space is scary and people get stuck. The Russians got stuck too. So, it's like, space, you could die. But I could have died in mountain biking too. I hit my head on a tree once. It's like, this could be the end.
Yeah.
I could be a quadriplegic also. So you can't worry about that stuff. It's like, you'll die eventually. Don't worry about it. So let's get out there and do the thing.
Cool. All right, William, what's next for you besides the work with mixed reality and Tequity?
In this coming, even now, starting my own, doing a lot of content creation. So my own blog, we're going to produce probably one event this year around some of the things that we're doing with mixed reality and AI and whatnot. So just things like that, producing more content, getting more people involved, hooking people up, creating our network, that sort of stuff.
Okay. All right. So feel free to plug where we can find you.
William-a-adams.com is my website, and all my social icons are there and content and what I'm doing and newsletter and all that sort of stuff.
All right. And before we wrap, definitely leave us with a parting shot. I'd say let's gear it towards minorities that are on the fence about getting into the tech industry. Like, leave us with a parting shot, some inspiring words to encourage them to make that leap.
Okay, the parting word is pretty easy. The tech industry, in air quotes, is everything now. So it's easier than ever. Go get yourself a ChatGPT subscription or whatever. Get into one of those chat bots, start learning what the state of the industry is, and leverage those. We all have magic wands. Go leverage that stuff to find your passion. Don't worry about trying to learn anything specific like, oh, I'm going to go learn Python. It's like, no. Go find your passion, find the tech angle to that passion, and leverage the tools to do something really interesting along the lines of stuff that you like doing, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. William A. Adams, williamadams.com. Like I said, you've been a trailblazer in this industry for decades, and this was a great conversation. I enjoyed it tremendously. Just picking your brain and just learning more about you outside of the professional setting. So
fun times, huh?
Oh yes. So I look forward to doing it again. Hopefully we can go deeper. I think it's kind of my fault this time.
Pick a subject. Pick any subject. We can go as deep as you want.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna hold you to that.
All right.
But yeah, thanks again for your time and for Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.